Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. I'm your host, Mari Riesberg. Over the past several years, I've combined my degrees in acting and somatic psychology to share my sustaining creativity techniques with performers, and now I've decided to share it with a bigger audience that includes you. I believe we are all creative, and this podcast is all about that. I'll be interviewing people from all backgrounds, ages, and creativity experiences to share just how creative we all are. Today, I'll be chatting with Kellyn Uhl. She's one of 13 dance movement therapists practicing in the state of Michigan and currently works with groups and individuals experiencing mental health crises in inpatient psychiatry. Please enjoy Kellyn Uhl. Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. Today I'm here with Kellyn Uhl. She and I met 2015, I believe, at Michigan State when I was a guest artist there sharing my sustaining creativity work. Kellyn, thank you so much for being here today. I'm super excited to chat with you about creativity. So why don't you share a little bit about who you are and what you do so those listening have a better sense of who you are?
Well, it's interesting you bring up 2015 and when we met, Mari, because that was a turning point in my life.
Oh.
A huge turning point creatively, actually, because I was teaching at MSU and, thinking about going back to grad school to teach, and then was learning more and more about dance movement therapy, which I'll talk about and I'm sure I'll talk about it throughout. It's a huge part of my life, but meeting you, someone who is a dance movement therapist, was actually a huge part of it. It felt like a clue from the universe, like, oh, what are the odds I'm meeting a dance movement therapist when there aren't very many in Michigan? And you came out, of course, to do that workshop. So anyway, that's kind of cool. But so yeah, I am a dance movement therapist. I am a registered dance movement therapist working toward my board certification. And I live in Michigan. I lived in New York for 8 years, but I'm a Michigander originally. And I currently work in Lansing, Michigan, live and work. Well, I live in Lansing. I work around Lansing. A couple of my jobs are on hold right now because of the pandemic, of course, but my main gig is an inpatient mental health hospital, and we are still fully functioning. So I've been working during all of this, which has been really fascinating and strange and hard. And yeah, it's been a lot of things. Gosh, what else can I tell you about myself?
Prior to you being a dance movement therapist, you had a pretty big dance career.
Dance, acting. I got my BFA from Michigan State and worked as an actor and dancer for years in New York, doing mostly musical theater, lots of regional theater, and and then stumbling upon other ways of being a creative person in the world became really important to me, which we'll probably talk about more.
Yeah. And you also teach.
Or right now. So I teach at Michigan State. That's another one of my gigs. I'm only teaching one class a year. I'm teaching Intro to Dance, which is really special to me because we get to talk about the role of dance from the perspective of being a human body that moves rather than a technically perfect picture. And we really deconstruct sort of what dance is for us. And it's really interesting to do that from a place of introduction to dance, because a lot of students come into the class expecting to learn a lot of steps and a lot of technique. And I have to do a little expectation management with them that we're going to yeah, we're going to kind of explore dance from the perspective of how does our body want to move today.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a very cool opportunity to do that. Yeah.
We're going to chat about creativity today, and
Yay.
I want to know what it means to you to be creative.
Yes. So let me think how to begin answering that question. I fancy myself a creative person. I don't really use the title artist anymore. That feels like a choice because I find that I value creative process over product so much. I care very little about products. I find I don't necessarily make many tangible things.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I fancy myself a very creative person. And that's caused me to form a definition of creativity for myself that's really about creativity being like a lens that I can use to view my experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that probably was really honed through studying dance movement therapy. So much of that work is about going into a space with another person or with other people and setting aside expectations and engaging creatively together. Letting myself be led by others feels very, very creative to me. So yeah, it feels like a lens, and it feels like something that I is very mindful. It's very conscious. It feels like a choice and a perspective of things. So, you know, when I think about my most creative acts, they seem very mundane, maybe to others, but they feel extremely creative to me. And so, for example, the act of getting dressed. So I'm someone who really likes the act of getting dressed, meaning sort of choosing clothing to wear, even pressing it, deciding maybe what accessories would go with that. And it feels like a very creative act, and even wearing the clothing feels creative. It feels extremely expressive, and it's something that a few years ago wouldn't necessarily have said, yeah, getting dressed or going thrifting is a creative hobby. But now, yeah, I perceive it as an extremely creative and necessary part of my lifestyle. Another creative act that I engage in that maybe wouldn't seem that creative is the act of walking my dog, as cheesy as that sounds, because we take a different path every time. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like a way of weaving through the neighborhood. And it feels creative, looking down a certain street that we've never been on, seeing a patch of sunflowers and saying, okay, we're going to go this way, sort of being led. So I guess a huge part, what I'm getting at, or what I'm realizing as I'm rambling here, is that creativity for me is very intuitive. Yeah. Very much, I'm a student of Elizabeth Gilbert, of course. She talks a lot about sort of creativity as curiosity rather than, passion. I really ascribe to that idea that by merely following what I'm curious about, I'm able to feel as if I'm co-creating with whatever is around me, whether it be my closet, mm-hmm. or the walk, the environment that I'm in. I'm thinking about another creative act that I do a lot, which is writing letters to people.
Handwritten letters?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I write a lot of letters, like even to my parents who don't live that far away. I include quotes. To my friends who live on the East and West Coast, who I don't get to see really anymore. And that feels like an incredibly sort of mindful creative act. And I don't necessarily go into the letter writing when I say dear Emma or whatever. I don't have a plan for what I'm going to write, but it's usually surprising to me what happens when I start writing. So these are all examples of, I guess, being surprised, following intuition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing also is like really trusting that process, whatever it is, whatever it looks like, having a lot of trust within yourself to follow whatever road or clothing or being called to put on or what's coming out of your pen. And that I think is such a huge part of creativity for me, really trusting whatever it is okay. And it doesn't need to look a certain way or feel a certain way or show up in this pretty package. It could be anything that what you were talking about through that lens is your perception of creativity.
Yes, exactly. And that's sort of how it really takes practice, I think, because we're really taught, I think from a young age, a lot of us that when we're making something, we should, or at least I was taught, maybe because I grew up dancing in like a pretty strict choreographed, instructive way. I got this idea that the product was the most important thing and that it had to sort of be a certain way. And I definitely used to identify as a perfectionist, and still, I would say that's my biggest creative struggle, is falling into the habit of suddenly wanting to make something perfect. But there's so much freedom, and this is why I love dance movement therapy. There's so much freedom in just sitting back, and rather than try to control, sort of like pausing and waiting for the inciting creative thing to happen and then responding to it, rather than, it's so different, like dance movement therapy versus a dance class. In the dance class, there are of course benefits to both. There's nothing wrong with instructive movement or technique. It's all very wonderful and necessary depending on what you're looking to experience. But you go into the class, you're going to be guided through something very specific in a class and have a specific outcome. And in dance movement therapy, it feels like the process is all we have, because we don't know what's going to happen. There's literally no, we have goals in therapy, but we don't have a product in mind, any particular product. I couldn't imagine what the client is going to say or do or how they're going to move that day. And so, I love it. It feels like, throughout my day, I sort of go back and forth between doing paperwork and then going back and doing therapy group, and doing paperwork and doing a therapy group, doing an individual session, doing paperwork. And the paperwork is so very product oriented, of course. It's like, define or illustrate what just happened with the client in the group. And then it's such a relief to go back into the room and go, yes, at one point I will be writing a note about this because I have to for the sake of insurance. But right now we can settle into expectationless exploration, and I love it. It's so fun.
Yeah. And as a dance movement therapist, having skills and tools and training to support whatever shows up, I think is something to highlight as well. So that creativity that is being asked of you in the moment, that flexibility to say, I'm going to use this intervention, or I'm going to use this skill here, and maybe it will fail beautifully, and maybe it will, spark something in a client that is meaningful and profound. Sometimes, less profound than other times.
Exactly.
I think that's really important to remember. You're not just walking in without a lot of support in the therapy.
Yes, it is so important to note that without a very sturdy foundation of the training, the just the sheer practice of doing this over and over again. It's not that it's just totally willy-nilly. Yeah. And we're going in and it's like a mishmash of stuff. It's well, and that's kind of the cool part too, is that as the therapist, I really get to be the sturdy witness who then sort of begins to adapt myself based on the various skills and techniques that I've practiced, adapts myself to the client. And then we can kind of be in a creative conversation together, often nonverbal, which I also really like, because I'm an incredibly cerebral person who likes to sit and talk all day. So it's a practice for me to sink into what's happening beneath my brain's chatter.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's so important to note. And I've noticed that a lot with my students, because part of what we're doing in the Intro to Dance class that I teach is really exploring the unknown together in a creative movement way. But, if I begin, I can tell it's almost like a little diagnostic assessment that happens. Like if I give them an exercise that requires a lot of embracing of the unknown, for lack of a better term, and they are paralyzed, if I notice that there's no movement happening and there's paralysis, it gives me information that we need to go back a few steps, that we're not yet ready to we need more skills. We need a little bit more foundation.
Yeah. Because
just opening up the room and going, move, that's not enough. We need to lay foundation first. Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to circle back. You talked a little bit about kind of challenges you experience in creativity, being perfectionist, and then you just talked about something too that sparked that again for me, and now it has completely left my mind.
That's okay.
But I'm curious what happens for you when you bump up against challenges with your creativity or in creative experiences. What happens for you?
Yes. Well, I'm thinking back to when actually in 2015, when I was back at MSU, I think it was, whenever I did, I think that was in 2015, I devised a play with a group of students, and it was really cool. It was completely created together. And I remember part of my sort of crisis of, do I want to continue like teaching theater and going down that route, or do I want to go back and do something else? Like, for example, dance movement therapy. Part of my crisis was that I was really, my desire to control the outcome of a devised piece. It was, well, first of all, part of it being devised was the idea that we were creating it together, and it wasn't completely within my control, the ultimate sort of product that we made. But the idea that there was a product at all really brought up all my stuff, because I really, the wanting to impress the people who had hired me, wanting to validate being given the opportunity, wanting it to be, just a good show by whatever standards I had set in my own mind. And it just, a lot of it wasn't that enjoyable for me, because the stakes of wanting to make a quote unquote good piece of theater were so high. The desire to control everything was really big. And so actually another part of my choosing to do dance movement therapy was the idea that, we weren't going to be making end products all the time. We could fully sort of embrace the process side of things. And so I would say a desire to control can really come up. And that's another reason that I kind of stopped identifying as an artist, which again, maybe sounds pretentious in some strange way, but like, I'm not an artist, I'm a creative person. But I I just really, that means something to me because, and I know, well, you were talking a little bit about this, Mari, earlier, sort of the reason you created this podcast, this idea that creativity is for all of us. But I definitely grew up with the notion that the artists were the creators and everyone else sort of consumed that art, got to experience it secondhand. And what I learned, actually, when I transitioned from being a performer to going back to school and studying dance movement therapy, I felt for a while like, wait, do I have to sort of abandon my artist self now? Because now I'm like doing this clinical work. But what I realized is, and what dance therapy gives me, is the ability to be incredibly creative in a job that is also clinical and not explicitly artistic. But even so I have an Instagram account called Dancing in Work Clothes, which
I love. All
Thank
of
you.
Little videos or posts or whatever. I enjoy seeing them.
Well, thank you very much. And yeah, I made that account kind of with the idea that I realized that, I always wanted to be a dancer, but then this is kind of another conversation, but the body image and all of that, I always felt kind of held back, comparing myself to other dancers and things. And when I was able to start doing dance movement therapy, I realized, and the fact that I do it, I actually work at a hospital here that's in a really rural part of Michigan, a little bit north of where I live. And I had this revelation one day, like, I'm dancing in the middle of the afternoon, like fully dancing and sweating with people who are going through an incredibly difficult moment in their lives. I've been, my title is dance movement therapist, and I'm doing this in the middle of my office job work day. And it was just so amazing to me that I could be doing something that felt so wildly creative and fun and playful. And that's where sort of dancing in work clothes came from, is the idea that I can dance anywhere at any time. I don't need permission. I don't need a costume. I don't need a stage. I don't need choreography. I just need willingness to participate in moving. I just need the creative lens that we were talking about before. Yes.
No, I really like that. And how do you work with your own blocks when they come up for you?
Yeah, good question. I'm trying to think. I mean, so it comes up a lot in the dance therapy groups, for example. There's a desire sometimes to manipulate where the group is going because I want to create an experience for the clients rather than allow it to come from them. And, we have this thing with, I think, therapy in general, but dance movement therapy, about really meeting the client where they're at and not pasting my own notions of where they should be or where I want them to be on top of them. That's not fair to them. It's not useful for what we're doing. So yeah, I think for me, it's about, like, the word pause was a revelation to me. I remember in grad school, we had a really rigorous internship experience. And I remember, like, we would come to class, and discuss our internship experience. And I remember sort of coming over and over again back with my issue of, I'm wanting to, for one reason or another, control where the group is going to go. I'm wanting to suddenly start making suggestions about, which I realized, to people who might not know about dance movement therapy, that's hard to imagine. It's a difficult thing to explain, I think. But, I might in any given moment want to tell the clients, let's imagine we have a ball of energy in our hands. Let's manipulate it, or do, sort of suggest something out of the blue, though. So it didn't really come from what we're doing in the group or what they're experiencing. And I remember my teacher, suggesting over and over again that I just pause before I make the suggestion and sort of wait for my, to be drawn back in, I guess, by something that's happening outside of me rather than wanting to manipulate the experience. So really, and that works, I think, in other ways too. I'm trying to think of some of my other creative activities I do on my own. I guess embracing sort of a meandering quality to my creative process is important. I would say the creative acts that I do on my own aren't incredibly like focused. I'm not like, stop everything, I need to paint. Like, it's not like that. It's sort of integrated into the day. It's like, how do I describe it? Like, I'm even thinking of another creative thing that I do, which probably annoys my boyfriend who I live with, although he says it doesn't. But I rearrange the house a lot. But it feels very, fun to me. And I have a lot of house plants. I love plants. And so I even just like to sort of like really find the perfect spot for them. This sounds actually really controlling too, but but it's really fun to imagine moving the space around and almost like letting the space speak to me rather than, I don't come into the room wanting it to be a certain way. It's just sort of about like, oh, what if this goes here? And then I'll put this here. And feels very
trial and possibly, error. I don't know if that's really the word, but trial and awareness of, does that feel like it works? No. Okay. What's the next piece I can try in that space? Or
and that's what I think about, or that's what makes the process sort of like a mindful meditation.
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of the things I'm doing are really about sinking into the moment as much as possible. Not that that's always easy.
No.
But trying to sink into the moment and, begin to kind of co-create with whatever's around me.
Yeah. Really using the environment that you have available to you.
Yes.
And it sounds to me like there's a lot of intention behind it.
Yes.
And the final product isn't necessarily the goal, the experience of, oh, what does it feel like to put this in this corner, or this plant over here, or to move this furniture, or just to move my body? How is that?
Right.
How does that nourish me in this moment to bring me to the next moment?
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. I'm thinking actually of, that made me think of Stuart Brown. Have you ever heard of him?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. The play guy.
I did part of my thesis was on his work.
Ooh, well then I'm going to ask you something, Mari. Because I was actually thinking, when I knew we were going to be talking today, I was thinking about, okay, the ways that creativity and play are either, I'm like, are they the same? Are they, do they have different goals? I'm thinking of his definition in particular, which is about sort of a sense of embracing purposelessness.
Right.
And the reason that sort of works with my definition of creativity is the idea that, while intentional, it's not product oriented. So I don't know, I'm curious what you think of that interaction. Are they the same? Are they different?
I mean, I think if you asked 100 people, what's the definition of creativity, you would get 100 different answers. And the other day I came across one, I'm just looking it up because I'm not going to remember it off the top of my head, but one that's an act of creativity can be grand and inspiring, such as creating a beautiful painting or designing an innovative new product. But an idea need not be artistic or world-changing to count as creative.
Ooh, yes. Amen to that.
Yeah, life requires daily acts of ingenuity and novel workarounds. In this sense, almost anyone possesses some amount of creativity. So I think in Stuart Brown's work, he talks a lot about creative play and the 7 different types of play. And so I think there are times where they overlap, and at the same time, they can be very different and experienced in very different ways. And creative play, I think we see often through the lens of childhood and children. And maybe this is totally my own conjecture. I have nothing to back this up with. But maybe adults see creative play as the artists or people who are considered performing artists get to do that, and they don't have much of that in their own personal adult life. So the creative arts are reserved for creative play, and other types of play are things that I can do separately. But I think there's definitely overlap and big distance.
Yep.
The idea of being creative and what that means to every person individually, I've learned is very different as I've talked to many different people about what creativity means to them. And every time I hear someone tell me their version of it, I think, yeah, that's exactly it.
Yes.
And then
many truths.
It is. It's many truths, and agreeing that, oh yeah, that makes absolute sense. And I can see pieces of that in my own life, and definitely see it in the people I'm interviewing in their lives and how that translates. So I love the idea of creativity. I love being creative, experiencing it. It inspires me. It fuels my soul. And hearing you talk about creative experience and just creativity in general, and, moving things around in your apartment or house, and that inspiration, I have a curiosity of what does inspire you to step into that space of, I'm going to rearrange things.
Good question. Do I even know? I don't know if I know. I mean, actually, I'm thinking, because you brought up sort of childhood play, I am feeling like, I'm having memories of myself as a kid, and how that, and this is where sort of play and creativity are intersecting for me, because I remember these moments of sort of being completely consumed by my imagination. And the interesting thing, and what I'm realizing now as I look at or think about my list of creative acts, is a lot of them happen sort of in solitude, and I like it that way. At the same time, I feel like I'm very collaborative and enjoy collaborating, and this is making me consider like my controlling thing. I'm like, maybe I'm still really controlling. And I am. It's something that I think I'm always working on. But
it's life work, right?
Yes, it is. That is a big thing for me. It is. But I remember, like, as a kid, really enjoying to play by myself. And I actually have some really embarrassing memories of like being so absorbed in an imaginative scene or something that I was talking out loud or singing or something by myself. And I actually can think of a couple times when my dad was like around the corner and kind of started applauding, or like, hey, are you all right in there? And I think that there's something about that now, like when I'm doing something creative, especially by myself, is a sense of being totally consumed in the act of, even in the rearranging, even in rearranging my house plants. Like, it feels important. It feels interesting. It feels fun. It feels like I don't know. Like I said before, I don't know where things are going to end up, but the process of moving them around is fun. Even getting dressed, like sort of going to so I really like thrifting too. And I would say like 98% of what I own and wear is like and by thrifting, I mean like not necessarily fancy thrift stores, which I think some people like go to boutique thrift shops. This is really like a Salvation Army, like experience Salvation Army. And we have quite a few chains around here, Goodwill. And there's so much enjoyment in like being guided to find, by the way, I always go by myself when I go, another sort of creative act in my aloneness. Yeah. And just like sifting through the racks and being sort of like called to something and putting it on and imagining, I don't know, that it'll influence how I feel that day or something.
Mm-hmm.
And part of me questions, like, is this creative in some ways? And another way, I'm like, I think it is. It feels like a lifestyle of choosing to see things through a lens of creativity rather than a random act.
Yeah.
Feels like
meaning to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It sounds like all of these bring you a lot of joy as well.
Yes. Yes. And actually I remember, so I'm real big with words, and like kind of choosing which words I'm going to use, sort of like the creative person versus artist thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of just my unlearning, meaning my growth as a human being, unlearning what I was told to be versus like what I actually want to be. And so I'm thinking of Liz Gilbert and how she uses the word curiosity to really describe her experience of creativity. And for me, it's the word delight. And I actually used to use the word as a verb and say, I'm going to go delight now. I'm delighting right now. Because to sort of follow what delights me or brings me sort of like a quiet experience of pleasure, satisfaction, enjoyment. Yeah, that feels very important, which I really would say my walks with my dog, and we take very long walks together. It's really a process of delighting in the world. I realize how nerdy I am as I'm saying all of this too.
No, I think it's great. I feel like we could talk for hours just about the walks that you go on with your dog.
Yes. It's true. Because there's no path. I think that's why I like it. We try to never take the same path twice. And yeah, it feels sort of collaborative with her. She's a good collaborator.
Nice.
Yeah.
I really feel like we could talk for hours and hours.
We probably could.
Creativity.
I definitely am long-winded when it comes to creativity. So thank you for listening.
Thank you for sharing all of your pieces and your wisdom. I love it. And I've been asking everyone a couple questions, and you've actually kind of answered one of them. So, but if there's anything else that comes up when I ask the question, what's an everyday issue in your life that you have had to use creativity to solve?
Ooh. That's a good one. Ooh. Everyday issue. Yeah. Oh gosh. I think my brain is wanting to go to like objects, like something about, like I'm thinking of my dad, who actually both my parents are incredibly creative in the sort of handy way.
Mm-hmm.
Like my dad and mom can both fix anything. They are like domestic superheroes. Like my dad, there was never like a handyman around. My dad always fixed everything. My mom she sews and she cooks and everything she makes is beautiful. And so I guess, I don't know if I have a specific answer for myself to that right now, other than the idea that I feel like I grew up around sort of like, I feel like if my parents were younger people right now, they would have like a YouTube, like life hack channel. And so I guess that's the answer I'm thinking of. I can't think of anything in particular for myself right now, other than growing up around people where there was a will, there was a way to either repair something or create something. And that was just sort of woven into who they were, that you didn't need to reach very far outside yourself to solve a problem. That's coming to mind.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
And then what is your secret to creativity?
Ooh, my secret. I guess it's a very simple secret. It's just paying attention. That would be my secret with creativity, is as much as, and I guess it's my workaround for when I start to feel like I want to control things, is instead just pay attention, listen, look, smell, breathe. Don't do so much. Just wait. Yeah. And pay attention.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for chatting.
Of course.
And if people wanted to get in touch with you or learn more about the things that you do, how might they do that? Or even follow you on Instagram? I know you mentioned your clothes.
Yeah, I would say probably Instagram is the place. I do a little write-up of, I call it field notes, but sometimes I'll sort of synthesize my findings from my day at work and post a picture of my work clothes, which I call my dance clothes that day. So that's kind of the space, I guess, that I'm really putting stuff right now. I don't really have a huge online presence right now, but yeah, I would say Instagram, dancing period in work clothes is my handle. Yeah. I can't think of anything else. People could email me, but just shoot me an Instagram message or check out my Instagram.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate chatting with you and hearing all of your musings and curiosities about creativity. It's inspiring to chat about dance movement therapy. I don't get to do that often these days. So
yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for creating this podcast. I'm excited to take a listen to everybody else you'll be interviewing.
Wonderful. Thanks for listening to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. We'd love to keep in touch, so like us on Facebook and Instagram. We are Sustaining Creativity. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tag your friends and your family so they can listen too. We love to hear from you, so leave your comments, reviews, and questions. Tune in Tuesday for our next episode. And remember, with creativity, anything's possible.